Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the most important conversations around ontological leadership that we're having. Dan and I are having this on a regular basis. And Dan, I was just, we were chatting before we started the podcast today about this phenomenon that I was observing. And I know you've got some powerful insights that I know people need to hear, really, really need to hear. Let me just set the context. What I was talking about is we're in a weird situation right now. I've been observing it personally in terms of, the business world, the tech and startup world that I've been in now for, more than 15 years. And I've been saying that, I've got a couple projects that we've been raising money for an obscene amount of time. Interestingly enough, we raised money for these projects during COVID successfully. But I think it was the early days of COVID where people were still operating from the old paradigm. And then as COVID moved on, and now we're on the post-COVID period, at least post-COVID in the sense that COVID isn't a thing anymore that is like, dragging society down. And we all wanted to get back to normal. And so there's been this sort of habituated way of approaching business, life, the structure of how we get along with society, like everyone go back to work, get back to the office, get back to normal. But yet we're seeing the behavior is quite, I would just say it's almost schizophrenic in a way. It's like we're simultaneously wanting to do two things that are opposed to one another. We want to lean into the way we used to be pre-COVID, but it's not working. And so what I'm noticing is a lot of contraction and constriction. So the capital markets over the last 2.5 years, at least on the investment side, have been a both and kind of thing I've experienced where people want to invest and then they don't. They hold the money. So it's very much like the same sort of contraction that we saw with people hoarding toilet paper. We're seeing right now this contraction in the world governments contracting in, holding. It's about us, right? We're seeing it in Germany, France, United States, UK. It's like globalization be damned. All that matters is just us now, right? And when we think about contraction and sort of holding in, whether it's holding money, holding toilet paper, or holding onto our identity as a nation, all I see in that is a child gripping its parent, like holding on to something, like wanting it to be the same as it always was, wanting that security, wanting that predictability. And so what I think we're experiencing is a collective trauma response from COVID that has not yet been processed, and also a resistance to moving into the new. The old is not coming back. We need to be moving into the new. Now, you have a lot to say about that, so I'm going to turn it over to you to help us frame this in a different light.
Yeah, perfect. So I like this idea of contraction. On the one hand, we see the stock market growing at rates that make absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
So we are no longer in an analytic market. We're in a market of momentum. We're in a market of frenzy. We're in a market that has no rationality. When you talk about the collective consciousness, that is real. And what was brought forward in terms of the fear, that's now embedded in the fascia of our bodies. And it's going to be difficult for a lot of people to move beyond that, right? But as I was talking to you before we started, there's a thing called the rule of 80. And basically, the rule is that every 80 years, we hit an inflection point. And the inflection point is the demise of the old. It's the contraction. It is the slow decline. The inflection is now what is the new paradigm. So if you started in 1776, that's when we started. 80 years later, 1860, you're at the Civil War. That's an inflection point. That created a whole difference in the country, right? We went from South and North to the United States, slavery, lots of different things that needed to get kind of reconditioned. So now we go from 1860 to 1940, and we're at World War II. That's an inflection point now where there's a new world order that's created, right? We now begin the emergence as the superpower in the world. And then we move from 1840 to 2020, and that's the world of the pandemic. And here's what's going on. If you look at the world today, the energy of the dominator culture is overwhelming us right now. It's overwhelming in surveillance. It's overwhelming in censorship. You can see where the hooks are of trying to hang on. We see it in our election today. The verbiage and the words are just awful.
Mhm.
It is this idea that I don't want to give up because I have something, as
Mm.
opposed to letting go. So we have two
Yeah.
options. We can hang on, and then our fingers will come down the
Yeah.
chalkboard, right?
Yeah.
Or we can actually let go. And so this new paradigm in terms of being a leader is moving from three-dimensional leadership, what I call three-dimensional leader, to multi-dimension, fifth dimension leadership. In the third dimension, you have a hierarchy and a bureaucracy, right? So now you're top down, you are command and control, it's do as you're told, it disempowers a workforce, it eliminates the idea of innovation, vulnerability, empowering the genius that you hired the people for, and you set up both silos, because when things are siloed, the only people that get to look holistically are at the top.
Mhm.
Except that world doesn't work anymore. So
Mhm.
if we were to sit and look at an iceberg, the top gets to see the 10%. The enterprise gets to see the 90%. If they're waiting to be told what to do, if they're waiting because they don't want to make a mistake, they don't want to color outside the line, all of that is about hanging on.
Mm.
So when I look at it, I honestly believe that we are moving from this rational left brain idea, which is what a bureaucracy is. It's all about
Mhm.
process, procedure to outcome. That game is done. We're
Yeah.
now in a world, and why do I say that? Because AI is this is the inflection point. AI is the lever on the fulcrum that's going to change everything. It's going to move us from left brain to right brain. If
Yep.
that happens, then what we're talking about is creativity.
Yep.
So Sundar Pichai from Microsoft came out today. 40% of coding is now being done with AI.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
going to hang on to be a coder? I don't
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
so.
Don't go to college for an IT degree right now.
Right? So what I'm going to say that may be controversial is we are entering a new awakening in a spiritual realm. And I
Yeah.
don't mean the woo-woo idea of, and I don't mean organized religion. What I mean is that if we are going to prosper, we're going to move heart, soul, and mind, which much more aligns, quite honestly, with mission vision that's printed on your wall at the
Hmm.
headquarters, right? So there's this hanging on, I want everybody back at the office, and there's a whole group of people letting go, saying, I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay? So what I think now happens is we move from silos and hierarchy and status, and we're going to move to peer-to-peer accountability in teams. And the way to best look at this, if you can imagine a hierarchy, everybody knows there's a thing up here in a line, and then a couple more boxes, and then there's lines
Hmm.
and all of that. What if you were to look at a beehive and you
Yeah.
were to look at each one of those little parts of the hive as a module?
Yeah.
Now we take teams, and it's been researched out. Once a team is more than 150 people, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So we're going to have teams now in the enterprise, and the teams are now going to be unleashed. It's
Hmm.
going to drive peer-to-peer accountability, not status, and not managers who micromanage because they're fear-based to make a mistake.
Yeah.
It's going to drive innovation. It's going to bring people at the closest level to what's going on in the world, in the business, to make really good decisions. It's why you hired them in the first place.
Right. Or should have been.
Right. So
Yeah.
now what happens is when people actually are seen, heard, matter, and contribute, you deepen the engagement, you deepen the connection, you deepen the trust in the group, and your outcomes now become much better. Decision making becomes in the moment, it becomes iterative. It's a whole different way of working. It's going to
Yeah.
be much easier for startups and small to mid-sized business to make that transition. For the
Mm-hmm.
multinational, for the multi-billion-dollar guys, for the corporations that have 70 divisions, they're going to have to start almost like a skunk work and try it in a division and then
Yeah.
see what happens. And then it goes to another division, and eventually it can roll out. The biggest inhibitor of letting go to that is the CEO who goes, but I have to make the quarter. I
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
show up with the finance. I have to fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And so for the CEO, it's going to be difficult. Where the opportunity lies, I think, is in the 30 to 40, 45 even C-suite leaders who today have a longer runway. They have a
Yeah.
20, 30-year runway. They don't have a 5 to 7-year runway. So this rule of 80, this inflection point, this new paradigm idea that will be more engagement, more trust, more connection, more realization of potential. The companies that figure this out with the new technologies are going to, basically the older companies are on this
They're
way
on
down.
life support. Well,
Yeah.
I want to, there's so much you've said that I want to kind of interject there. First of all, for all of our listeners, I just want you to be clear. You're not just listening to a podcast, but you're also listening to two people who are inviting you into a program where you can start to create and work to develop yourself as a leader and your company from the very principles we're talking about. So one of the things I want to say is, you know, within TMIC, we have a program called Design Lab, which is all about helping leaders actually become creators so that they can create the context, the infrastructure, and the modeling around the type of things that Dan was talking about. And Dan and I do this together. So I just want to invite you to that, because our intention is to be able to provide think tank, incubator, accelerator type spaces using our design shop methodology inside of Design Lab, as well as all of the ontological training and work that Dan and I have both individually done to help you become that leader. So I just wanted to put that out there for context. So please reach out to us, be in touch with us, because we want you in Design Lab. We want to give you a leg up. There's some things you were saying, Dan, that I think was that I think I want to kind of riff on for a second. You talk about the honeycomb model, and I agree that the honeycomb is a great metaphor for sort of the way we are going to be structuring work in terms of how we're working together in these different pods or these different modules inside of Design Lab. We're actually creating that to be one of those little honeycomb bits where you can bring the challenges that you're dealing with as a leader about your company and your organization, and you can, through the power of simulation, start to play with a different way of leading and a different way of creating as a business. So what does that mean? You mentioned that we're very productivity centric in the old model. I believe, and I was just talking with a friend of mine who's actually part of the TMIC Philosophical Brain Trust just a few nights ago. And we were talking about this very thing, about moving from a productivity-based economy to a creativity-based economy, because the productivity is going to be handled by AI. Just yesterday, I was talking to someone who was acknowledging, so I had a theory, right, about 6 months ago where I said, we're not going to need engineers anymore to the extent that we are used to having them. We're not going to need attorneys anymore to the extent that we're used to having them. We're not going to need accountants anymore, IT experts. And what I was saying is I predict what we're going to have are master engineers, master attorneys, master accountants, master IT experts who are going to be the human being rubber stamp on the work that AI does. You're not going to need teams of these people anymore. You're just going to need a few people who give us, as the human beings in this equation, the comfort that, yes, the AI did the work and a human being has verified and validated that the work is accurate, or at least is what we want it to be, and they've signed off. But to your point, it's the small and mid-sized companies that this is your opportunity, if you're a leader in a small or mid-sized company, to thrive massively. But you've got to start by becoming an ontological leader. You got to start by becoming a leader that is steeped in creative methodology, creative principles, and how to create pods of collaboration like a honeycomb inside of your organization that are using AI to do the productivity work, and the work of the honeycomb is the creativity work. All right. And it's working creatively is very different type of work than working productively or productivity based. So those are some things that come to mind when I was listening to you talk about all this.
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is, yes, today's organization, if I were to define it, it would be left brain driven. It would be process and procedure to outcome, and therefore productivity matters.
Yeah.
I'm going to say now, in the world in which we're playing with this new paradigm at the inflection point, we're in the age of intelligence. We're in the age of AI, machine learning, quantum computing, data science, and analytic, right? So productivity is table stakes. It doesn't go away. But productivity, what that leads to is linear thinking. It leads to being incremental. It leads to 3 to 5% is okay. No, that's not okay. We're in a world now of exponential, of quantum, of order of magnitude. If you start to think as a leader with those three terms, how would you look at your business? So we want to start on the creativity side. We have to all of a sudden move from distrust to trust. We have to move from fear-based to trust. We need to move from survival to trust. And I believe that our workforces, if they were unleashed to bring forward what you actually hired them for, and I have this in my own experience, where I was brought in to do a turnaround in a company, and the system, I worked in a company where the system could take literally somebody incompetent and make them look extremely competent. And I worked in a system where the more competent you were, the more incompetent you showed up. Right. And so this idea now of looking at systems is really important. Yeah. And it's going to take a mindset, and it's going to take a level of trust to experiment to see how this honeycomb can work for you. Right? But I know that the spiritual realm of this heart, soul, and mind, if that already is getting you upset, if that's triggering you, if that's creating tension, if that's making you go like this, we're onto something. Yeah. For those of you that are like, finally, then we're really on to something. So it works in both cases.
Yeah. Well, there's a subset of society that's saying finally right now. And I would say and I know that includes you and I would say that for those of us who are in the finally state, it is our responsibility and job to help others move over to this state, to create the frameworks and the methodologies to give those who aren't there yet, who are clinging to the old, to be able to let go and release and step into that creative power that is going to take for all of us to basically reorient to the new, which is happening now anyway. So, I mean, the train has left the station. And yes, these large companies, it's funny you mentioned that. So we're doing a prototype design lab right now with energy companies. So these are petroleum-based energy companies and leaders from these companies who are asking the question, where are we going? How do we get there? How do we integrate? Like, what does it mean to be an energy company when we're looking at a timeline of, say, 25 years where we won't exist anymore in our current state? I think it's going to be a lot faster than that. But that's what, they're hearing from the consultants and all of that is, basically by 2050, if you're a petroleum-based energy company, you've got to figure some stuff out. So these executives are trying to figure out, well, who are we? Where do we go from here? How do we integrate AI ethically, responsibly, effectively? And how does it augment our business? How does it affect our people? How do we manage our people effectively under these new constructs? These are all big questions. A lot of the companies are kind of just burying their heads in the sand at the moment. There's a study that was done by MIT that found that roughly it goes up or down by a point or two here or there, but it's remained quite flat since 2019, that roughly about 20% of companies are what they deem and call future ready, meaning that how they define future readiness is changing the dynamics of how you structure work to be creative, emergent, adaptive, to be able to synthesize information much more quickly and churn it out into something that is actionable, as opposed to just being overwhelmed by data and information, not being able to synthesize and do anything about it. So future-ready companies are those who started to implement these kinds of system structures and new leadership models so that they can be responsive and not reactive to the rapid transformation that we're going through right now. Only 20% are there. That means about 80% of them have their heads in the sand and they're still hoping for normal, AKA 2019 and earlier.
Yep. So let's bring that into the real world today. So with AI, what happens? We need huge data centers, 3, 4, 5, $6 billion investments. The biggest problem for an AI data center is, how does it cool itself?
Yeah.
Where's all the water coming from? And the electric grid. We haven't increased what they call base load in electric in 25 years. So we already have people on a waiting list. It's not that we can't build the data center, we can't operate it because we can't cool it.
Yeah.
So how do we now start to look at energy overall? But let's get even easier. I don't know if you've been watching it, but I think Walgreens is closing 1,200 stores. CVS is closing 700 stores. Yeah. So what did they do? They went out and they bought the care marks and they bought the big things over here, but we can buy everything at a drugstore from Amazon for less money with a lot less. It's like, instead of coming to the office, I don't need to go to Walgreens. If I go to Walgreens, the best experience I can hope for is to have all the plexiglass and then hope somebody can come within 5 minutes
with the key. Yeah.
So I can get a thing of deodorant. Are you kidding? So when we start now they're changing out the CEOs, right? Yes, that's a problem, but that's not an answer.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you're sitting there in a supply chain now where the middleman gets to determine what you Walgreens are going to pay for the drugs. In some cases, the drugs don't even get paid for. It's a loss.
Yeah.
Right? Now we go there, and so all of a sudden Mark Cuban says, I think
I was going to say Mark Cuban's cost plus drugs. Yeah.
Right. So this is this is the old world. The old world is, we'll be the stalwart, we'll be the big behemoth. We won't be able to move all that with agility or resilience. And all these little startups will happen, then we'll buy them. That business model, the idea of stock buyback, buy the innovation, that's really old world. So now what's going to happen, and how do we start to think differently? This is going to be really important. So for a CEO, I think having curiosity, I think being able to start to think different. If you're going to come in, so I'll give you an example. They brought the guy from Chipotle to Starbucks. Okay. that's legacy to legacy. For me, that's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
changing chairs on the
That's just
Titanic.
changing. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's changing the furniture. Yeah.
I actually got a survey from them, and it said you could win $100 gift card. What would you write to us? And I wrote to them and I said, number one, you have overpriced the value. So the price to value of the product is totally out of whack. $5 to $6 for a cup of coffee is
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Secondly, your coffee relative to competitors out there is substandard today.
Yeah.
Thirdly, your bakery is 10 years old and you've raised prices 100% more than going anywhere else in the market for the same thing,
Yeah.
right? And I could list all these different things that have happened. So the idea of growth for growth's sake, 30,000 locations, I think that game is over.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I
I'm
really
happy to
do.
hear that. I've been saying for years that our model of a growth for growth's sake model without limits, the only thing that it resembles is a cancer cell in nature. A cancer cell is the only thing in nature that grows just to grow and has no limit. Everything else has limits,
Mhm.
right? Everything else except a cancer cell. And what does a cancer cell do? Kills the host. So our model of economic growth is killing ourselves. And we've reached this moment where it's change or die, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I think, to your point about the fundraising, what hits me about this is it's an old model. In other
It
words,
is.
when you look at a corporate environment, its master is Wall Street.
Yeah.
I actually believe that is another one of those houses that's going to be coming down.
What do you think is going to replace it? What do you think it looks like?
I think there has to be a different scorecard than quarterly earning. So if
Totally
I
agree.
if I look at Amazon, Jeff Bezos, one of the things I thought was brilliant is day one, he said, I don't really care about you and your analysts and your everything else. I'm going to run a business for the betterment of the business for the long haul. If you want to invest, do it. And if you don't, don't.
Right.
So I think there's going to need to be a power shift that Wall Street has a role of being much more strategic than just ROI. I think we
Mm-hmm.
hit the wall on quote just ROI. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's my sense of it. And there may be, I know certain startups now are only looking at family offices. I'm working on a project you know about, and I'm working on government grants. I'm not even talking to a VC or a private equity,
Mm-hmm.
who's playing Russian roulette and uses me as one of for the seven that aren't going to work. And then
Right.
decides he's got this really great business and I've got this other little peg over here. So I'm going to put him in there. And now I've lost all my autonomy. All of that kind of me at the effect of,
Yeah.
that's not going to work. If you look at our workforce today, they are not at the effect of corporate. There is not the loyalty there. 70% of people are saying, if you need me back at the office like Amazon, I'm looking elsewhere.
Yeah.
So our talents are going to travel. And the other thing that you said that's a little scary, so I'm going to have AI coding by AI, but I'm going to have a master. But if I
Mm.
don't bring up some people here to how are they going to become the master?
Right.
So I think that while AI initially may end up getting rid of a lot of jobs, there's going to have to be a cohabitation because
There will be for a
otherwise,
period as transition. Yeah.
yeah, because
Yeah.
otherwise I won't have that development.
Yeah.
So um, I I don't have all the answers to it. I just know it's exciting, and I want to be in that tent at the circus, not in the old tent.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, none of us have all the answers. The invitation from an ontological perspective is we need to start learning how to collaborate and create together because the answers will emerge. They're an emergent property from that activity. So I also think gone are the days where you just hire the consultant to tell you what to do based on third-party research that they've done. We're talking about exponential growth and transformation and change of how we operate as a society, and that includes how we operate as an economy. No consultant has the answers anymore. You're wasting your time and money going to those consultants saying, tell us what to do.
Mm-hmm.
What the invitation is, and this is what our invitation is with Design Lab, is you know your business better than any consultant does. The problem is that you're in the business, so you don't have the perspective and the vantage point to be able to look at it creatively because you're just in the ruminations of the day in and day out. Design Lab is an opportunity for you to get outside of your business with others in your peer group and to work creatively and collaboratively around a lot of the topics that we're talking about right now, where you will co-create. It'll be an emergent property of the solutions that you need. And then you can start to implement those solutions. But I think that this sort of consultancy model is going to have to transform dramatically. It's going to become much more creative and collaborative than it is, this. I think if I could say this, the word expert is like anathema to me. Like I hate that word these days because everyone is an expert. I asked somebody a couple of weeks ago who was an expert in meditation. I said, "A, do you meditate?" And they said, "Well, once in a while." But they're selling themselves as an expert. And I said, "How did you become an expert if you only meditate once in a while?" And they're like, "Well, I read a book." Well, that doesn't make you an expert, right? I mean, so expert has no meaning in this social media society that we have right now, right? I mean, we've got to come up with another word because everyone's a bloody expert.
So the definition of an expert is someone who tells you they are one. That's it, right? So here's the deal. If you're hiring a consultant and a third party outside, they can bring to the table some information that you may not have. But what is sitting in your enterprise today that needs to be unleashed, that when you go below the C-suite and you engage those people in decision making, you start to uncover the unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
That they're there and people know them, but they're not asked for them, and we're not going to deliver what's not asked for.
Well, not only is it not asked, there's a culture that if it's not already in agreement with what the C-suite wants to hear, shut up and don't bring it up.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, what also happens is we start to uncover the biases. So we have leaders and we have people in authority. And you know what they say? This is the way we've always done it. You don't understand our industry. Thank God I don't, because I can think differently. And so those biases now in a peer-to-peer accountability, those biases start to come up and the group decides that's not how it works anymore. We now have adaptive decision making. We now have, peer accountability. We're not playing a status game anymore. There are so many benefits to this honeycomb idea, this team idea. And the teams are not separate. What they are is they are now the true influence and the people who will execute to the big idea of the company. See, the big idea of the company still matters. You're not giving up power in that you're architecting the company and its base ideas, values, systems, etc. What you're now getting is feedback. So we come to a team and we say, we were offsite, and here's what we're thinking strategically. So the question to the team is, what are we missing? And now the team says, but you didn't think about this, and you didn't think about this, and you didn't think about this. I really like this, and I think we could extend it to this. And now the C-suite goes back, and 2 weeks later, they're having every 2 weeks, they're redoing strategy. And they're redoing it based on meeting with the teams. And now we have a much more holistic, and we're also releasing energy. And a business is something, we all know this, we're energy. Businesses are energy. There are companies like SpaceX has incredible energy. If you saw that rocket that came down.
When it landed. Yeah.
If that wasn't energy personified, what was? Does your company have that kind of energy? So if I took a look at SpaceX and I took a look at Boeing, they're both in
Yeah.
the game. Where's the energy? It's not at Boeing.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and
So,
something else that you bring up, which I want to just touch on before we wrap up here in a few minutes, is, which I think is important, the responsibility and the role of the C-suite and the leaders inside of a company is going to change, because you're no longer in this command and control approach anymore. The leaders have to become experts, if I can throw that term in there for a second, at facilitating creative processes to activate the knowledge base that's sitting in the company, and it's been latent for years. So to your point, it's sitting there. What I don't know is there. It's known by someone. It just isn't known by you. And
mhm.
so it's no longer about just giving directives. It's actually about the leaders are going to have to be as effectively helping to facilitate creative, collaborative conversations around the operations of the organizations and the enterprise. And so there's these skills aren't widely known right now by a lot of leaders.
Right. And so this is this idea that I had around becoming a multi-dimensional leader. In the
Right.
third dimension leader role, you're telling people what to do. In a multi-dimensional role, I'm a coach, I'm a mentor, I'm a facilitator. Part of my job is to remove resistance. Part of
Yeah.
my job is to find out from you how I can move this forward frictionless, right?
Yeah.
There's all these different roles now that I have that are much more fulfilling for me, quite honestly. I no longer have to be the imposter. I no longer have supposed to have all the answers. I no longer am sitting up in uh, where it's quote lonely at the top. All of that kind of architecture and frame disappears, and now we
Yeah.
have a chance to architect this new vision of what it means to be an entity.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see, I'm just imagining what work could look like in companies that make this shift, is instead of having everyone in little tiny siloed, offices and little pods and stuff, instead, all of those people are in creative work environments where they're working together to solve the task at hand that week.
Mhm.
It reminds me very much of work that we've done with companies where we brought this incidentally to the table. And usually it's been project based, where it's like, okay, there's a project that we're taking on. And so we get, whole departments basically in a collaborative workspace, and we're facilitating the collaboration. We use our design shop method for that, which is what we use inside of Design Lab. But the thing is, and everyone's like, oh, this is the most amazing way to work. We should do this all the time. And then they go back to their offices and back to their little cubicles, and it doesn't happen anymore. And it's like, well, if that was so effective, why not build an entire operation where a department is a collaborative workforce that is working together and is facilitated around solving the different things that need to be solved to make the enterprise successful and working
Yeah,
together.
you have to change the system. So if you
Yeah.
want to look at two companies, take a look at Gore-Tex, which never had a boss. It
Mm,
started with what we're talking about. So
mm,
Gore-Tex is one, and it's a multi-billion-dollar global player. And the
mm-hmm.
other one to take a look at is Morningstar. This is another one that has more of an ecosystem approach to the business.
Yes.
And take a look at Lego. So there's three examples of this isn't just theory now, this is actually in practice, and it is delivering at very high rates of success.
Yeah. Yeah. Great examples as we wrap up. Well, Dan, this has been illuminating as usual. And again, just in closing, wanting to invite listeners to be in touch with us. If you're a
Yeah.
leader of a small company, a mid-sized company, or even of an enterprise, and you'd like to learn more and engage with us, or even be a participant in our design lab model, so that you can start to bring this level of leadership, this type of ontological leadership, this creative type of approach, be in touch with us. You can reach us at tmicglobal.com. And Dan, you've got an organization that you're pulling together too, where these leaders can jump into. Just say a little bit about that as we wrap up here, so they can get engaged as well.
Yep. So I have a year-long program that has 15 modules to it, and we take you through a whole process of opening up for you to become the most authentic version of yourself and to be a great leader. And you can reach me at Dan@Entelechy, ENTELECHY.ai. And that's also the website is entelechy.ai, and you can go and take a look at that. But the collaboration here is extremely meaningful, and I would hope that you all would at least put a toe in the water.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you again on our next podcast. And until then, we encourage you to check out TMIC Global and Entelechy. And we look forward to our next conversation. Dan, thanks as always.
Thank you.
That concludes this episode of The Most Important Conversations. This in-depth conversation could set you on the path to self-improvement, which is essential if you want to be an effective leader and take meaningful action in your life. If you enjoyed this episode and want more of these stimulating discussions, you can find them at tmicglobal.com. Remember, the world is at a crossroads right now. You can't afford to waste this opportunity to take charge of your life, build meaningful relationships with others, and co-create a brighter tomorrow. Thank you for listening. See you on the next one.